The cold, mechanical hum of the Galactic Council's broadcast filled every screen on Earth. It was a brutal and deliberate message. The camera zoomed in on the faces of human women, bound, battered, and surrounded by alien guards. The Galactic Council had no interest in subtlety. They knew the weight their actions carried. The broadcast was not just a public execution. It was a statement, a message meant to crush humanity's spirit. Jacob Wolfhart watched the screen, his hands gripping the edges of the console. His knuckles turned white, the raw fury inside him threatening to spill over. Each word of the Council's cold announcer was a dagger, twisting deeper with every passing second. The broadcast was not a mere demonstration of power. It was a calculated attempt to break Earth's will. These women, chosen as prisoners for their humanity, were about to die, their deaths designed to show the galaxy what happened when a species defied the authority of the Galactic Council. Jacob's thoughts raced, but his expression remained unreadable. Years of war had taught him the value of stoicism, but underneath, a fierce rage simmered, one that felt as raw as the day he lost his wife to the Council's invasion forces. His wife, Anna, had been just another casualty in a war that didn't care about the lives it crushed. He closed his eyes briefly, remembering the last time he'd seen her, alive, smiling, with their unborn child growing inside her. The memory, like the pain, was still fresh, though it had been years since her death. The voice of the announcer continued, telling the world that Earth had one last chance to submit. Jacob's teeth clenched. The broadcast cut to the faces of the women, now kneeling in chains. Their eyes were wide, some filled with terror, others with a quiet resignation. They knew what was coming. The announcer's voice echoed in the background. The execution of humanity's enemies will be broadcasted for all to witness. And then the screen flickered as the execution began. The women's lives were being ended in real time, the world watching in stunned silence. It was a moment that could have shattered any other leader, but not Jacob. He had seen death before, too much of it. But this was different. This wasn't a battle or a war. This was an insult, a personal attack on everything Jacob had fought for. The rage inside him, barely contained, now surged to the surface. A decision that had been years in the making now felt inevitable. His fingers moved to the comms panel. "General," he said, his voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "Activate the pack." The words hung in the air for a moment before the operator acknowledged with a nod. In the darkened war room, every soldier knew what those words meant. The werewolves, genetically enhanced humans, were Earth's secret weapon, a force of nature bred for war. They were the last line of defense, trained in both human combat tactics and the brutal savagery of their monstrous counterparts. The werewolves were soldiers, but they were also the embodiment of humanity's rage, its survival instinct. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on the screen. The broadcast had cut out, but the image of those women, dying so publicly, was burned into his mind. He had lost his humanity once before, but now it was time to take it back. Not just for him, but for everyone who had suffered under the Council's reign. His hand tightened into a fist, and the reflection of his bloodshot eyes filled the darkened glass in front of him. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Are you sure about this, Jacob?" It was Gregor Thorne, his second in command. "We've never used them in such a way before." Jacob turned slowly, his gaze hard. Gregor was one of the few men left from the old guard, brave, sharp, and loyal. But even Gregor could see the gravity of what Jacob was about to do. This was no ordinary battle. This was going to be their war, and the werewolves were more than just weapons. They were humanity's last stand. Jacob nodded. "I've waited for this moment for a long time. I'm not waiting any longer." He stood, his back straight, his posture commanding. "We're sending them a message. It's time for the Galactic Council to understand what happens when they push Earth too far." Gregor met his eyes, his expression hardening. "Then let's make sure they understand." Jacob took one last look at the screen, the faces of the women still etched in his mind, and then turned toward the door. The pack would be ready. The wolves would hunt. As he left the war room, he could feel the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. He wasn't just sending soldiers into battle. He was sending them into the unknown, with everything at stake. There was no turning back. Jacob felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the gnawing hunger for revenge, for justice, but also something deeper, a raw need to protect what was left of his humanity. He could hear the growl of the pack in his mind, their primal instincts ready to be unleashed. Tonight, the Council would understand that Earth's fury was not something they could ignore. In the distance, the howls of the pack began, echoing in the cold night air. It was a sound that carried both terror and defiance, a promise that humanity would not go down without a fight. Jacob's heart raced in time with their call. This wasn't just the beginning of a battle. It was the beginning of Earth's war, and he would be its blood-soaked champion. The night was cold, but it wasn't the kind of chill that came from the wind. It was a bitter, oppressive cold, one that gnawed at the bones and made the breath freeze before it could even reach the air. Jacob stood at the threshold of the hangar, his eyes scanning the dimly lit interior. The werewolves were inside, waiting. He could feel their presence before he saw them. A deep, primal awareness in the pit of his stomach told him they were there, watching, listening, ready. They were more than just soldiers. They were the embodiment of his own rage, a fury that had been smoldering since the first day of the invasion. They were his only family now, the ones who had never betrayed him, who would never turn their backs. And now they were all he had left. Gregor Thorne stepped up beside him, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the mission settling between them like an unseen force. Gregor glanced at Jacob, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just a raid. We're making a statement. A war, not just a battle." Jacob turned his gaze toward him, his face hard as granite. "I'm not sending them to fight for glory, Gregor. I'm sending them to make sure the Galactic Council understands what they've done. They've taken everything from us. Our families, our cities, our dignity. Now it's time for them to feel what it's like to lose." Gregor's eyes flickered for a moment, a spark of something. Fear, perhaps, or deep-seated worry, flickering beneath the surface. But he said nothing. Instead, he placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder, a silent show of solidarity. Jacob nodded, taking a deep breath as he stepped into the hangar. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air heavy with anticipation. The werewolves were gathered in a tight formation, their faces obscured by their hoods, their eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. It was hard to see them as men, at times. They moved with a predatory grace, and when they spoke, it was in low, guttural tones that rumbled from deep within their chests. They weren't human in the way that mattered. They were hunters. One of them, a tall figure with broad shoulders and dark, angular features, stepped forward. His name was Cade. He had been with Jacob from the very beginning, a bond forged in the crucible of battle. Cade's eyes gleamed with feral hunger, the bloodlust and the battle-born instinct that made him one of the fiercest of the pack. "Ready to hunt, sir?" Cade asked, his voice rough like gravel, but there was a steady, unwavering edge to it. He knew it was coming, and he was eager to be unleashed. Jacob met his gaze. "You know the plan. We strike fast. No mercy. We show them that Earth is not to be trifled with." Cade grinned, revealing sharp canine teeth. "They'll feel the weight of our rage, Wolfheart. They'll understand the price of their arrogance." The rest of the pack gathered around, each of them nodding, their eyes burning with the same unrelenting fury that had brought them to this moment. These men, these beasts, were not just soldiers. They were the last bastion of humanity's defiance, the embodiment of their unbroken spirit. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of determination and bloodlust surging through him. He felt the familiar pulse of power course through his veins, the same power that had driven him through every battle, every loss, every moment of suffering. He felt it now, pulsing in time with the growls of the pack as they prepared for the mission ahead. Gregor moved the control panel, his fingers moving quickly over the buttons. A low hum filled the air as the hangar door slowly opened, revealing the dark, star-filled sky beyond. The transport ships were waiting. "You know, Jacob," Gregor said, his voice quieter now. "There's no going back from this. Once we start this fight, it'll be war on their terms, and there's no telling what will happen next." Jacob's eyes never left the horizon, but he spoke with a grim conviction. I've lived with the fear of losing everything for too long. Gregor, it ends tonight. Either we show them what it means to push humanity too far, or we die trying." Gregor said nothing more. Instead, he simply nodded, as if he understood that there was no room for doubt in this mission. The doors were now open, the night stretching out before them, the cold air like a slap to the face. Jacob turned back to the pack. "Let's show the Galactic Council the price of underestimating us." Cade stepped forward again, his voice low but full of anticipation. "We've been waiting for this moment, Wolfheart. Let's make sure they remember who we are." With that, the pack moved as one, their powerful bodies shifting into darkness like a shadowed storm, each step heavy with purpose. Jacob's heart beat faster as he followed them out, his thoughts focused on the battle ahead. But even as they prepared to launch into the unknown, something deep within him stirred, a flicker of hope buried beneath the pain of loss. This was his moment, and it was their time to strike. The strike was swift as they had planned. The transport ships cut through the atmosphere like sleek, deadly predators, descending on the Galactic Council's fortified satellite. The cold, artificial glow of the massive structure was a stark contrast to the growing heat in Jacob's chest. He could feel it now, the anger that had simmered beneath the surface for so long, rising like a wildfire. Tonight, they would take everything the Council had stolen from them, and they would make them regret it. Jacob sat in the command seat of his ship, the controls humming beneath his fingers. The voices of the werewolves filtered in through his earpiece, a symphony of low growls and whispered commands. Cade's voice was the loudest, crackling with excitement. "We're almost there, Wolfheart. This is it. Let's show them what happens when they forget who they're dealing with." Jacob's grip tightened on the controls. His teeth clenched. The thought of what had been done to Earth, the people lost, the families torn apart, surged within him. He had seen too much destruction, too much cruelty. The Galactic Council's broadcast of the executions had been the breaking point, the final act of humiliation. He would never forget the image of those human women, faces twisted in fear, displayed for the universe to see. They had been made to suffer, but not for much longer. His ship's sensors pinged, pulling his focus back to the task at hand. The satellite was coming into view, the silhouette of its towering spires outlined against the inky blackness of space. The Council's elite guards would be waiting for them, but the werewolves had trained for this. They had fought on Earth's unforgiving soil, hunted the most dangerous creatures alive. They knew what it meant to face overwhelming odds, and to win. "Prepare for entry," Jacob said, his voice calm despite the storm brewing inside him. He turned to Gregor, who had remained silent for much of the flight. Gregor was an enigma, calculating, ruthless, yet fiercely loyal. Jacob trusted him more than anyone else alive, but even Gregor had his limits. "Are we ready?" Jacob asked. Gregor met his gaze, his face hard, but his eyes betraying a flicker of something. Hope, maybe, or was it fear? "I've been ready for this my entire life," Gregor said, his voice steady. "Just don't lose yourself in the fight. We can't afford that." Jacob didn't answer immediately. He knew what Gregor meant. The mission was about more than just revenge. It was about showing the Galactic Council that Earth wasn't a planet to be trampled on. It was a message to the universe that humanity would not bow, would not be forgotten. But it was also personal. Too personal. The countdown began, and Jacob's heart beat in sync with the flashing red numbers. His mind raced, the plan playing out in his head like a film reel. In less than a minute, they would breach the satellite's outer defenses. The first wave of werewolves would infiltrate, moving like shadows, while the second wave followed, heavier with weapons and firepower. They would make their way to the Council's central chamber, where the broadcast was being controlled. That was their target. The ship shuddered as they entered the satellite's atmosphere, the calm before the storm. Jacob's breath quickened. The werewolves' voices in his earpiece were a mix of eager anticipation and focused determination. They were ready. They had no fear. The ship jerked to a halt, the ramp lowering with mechanical hiss. The moment the doors opened, the pack surged forward, moving in a coordinated blur. Cade led the charge, his massive frame cutting through the air like a force of nature. Jacob followed closely behind, his feet barely touching the ground as they stormed the first hallway, rifles raised, eyes scanning for any signs of movement. They were met with resistance almost immediately. Laser fire erupted from the walls, and the sound of gunfire rang through the narrow corridors. But the werewolves were faster, stronger, more lethal. They tore through the first wave of guards like they were made of paper, their claws raking through armor with brutal efficiency. Jacob's heart raced as the battle intensified, his every instinct telling him to press forward. Push through. Jacob barked, his voice a low growl as he ran alongside his pack. We take that chamber now. The pack responded with a chorus of growls and snarls, their speed and strength unparalleled. They moved like a storm, unstoppable and fierce. The ship's artificial gravity had little effect on them as they bounded through the hallways, tearing down any obstacles that dared to stand in their way. As they neared the central chamber, the air grew colder, a stark contrast to the raging heat of the battle. The doors to the chamber were massive, adorned with the symbols of the Galactic Council. Jacob's mind raced as he prepared for the final assault. He knew that beyond those doors lay the broadcast feed, their chance to show the universe that Earth would not be silenced. Cade was the first to reach the door. He slammed his fist into the control panel, the door sliding open with a resounding hiss. The sight that greeted them was more grotesque than Jacob could have imagined. The broadcast room was a sterile, cold place, but the human women on display on the screens made it anything but. They were bound, their faces etched with terror, as the Council's leaders mocked them in front of the galaxy. Jacob's blood boiled as he watched the screens flash, the faces of the women a mirror of all that had been stolen from him, from Earth. He stepped forward, his voice a growl of fury. You've made your last mistake. Jacob's words echoed in the vast chamber, a low growl that reverberated off the cold, metallic walls. The members of the Galactic Council sat at their elevated platform, their smug expressions faltering as the werewolves surged forward, the echoes of battle still ringing in their ears. Their eyes, once confident and unshaken, now darted toward the massive figures that had stormed their sanctuary. The once immaculate broadcast room, meant for the humiliation of the helpless, was now the scene of their reckoning. The air crackled with tension as Jacob's eyes locked onto the Council's leader, Zareth, a tall, reptilian creature whose eyes glowed with a cold, calculating malice. Zareth leaned forward, his fingers tapping on the console before him. You've come to die, then, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. You cannot challenge the Galactic Council. Your kind is beneath us. Jacob's lips curled into a snarl. He could feel the weight of every moment, every struggle bearing down on him. Earth had been brought to its knees by the Council's decisions, but now, it was time to make them feel the crushing force of humanity's vengeance. We're not here to die. We're here to make sure you never forget the price of underestimating us. Cade's growl reverberated through the chamber, cutting through the tense silence. You'll regret thinking you could rule over us. We'll show you what true power is. Jacob took a step forward, his claws digging into the metal floor. The pack was ready. They had torn through everything to reach this point, and nothing would stop them now. With a signal from him, the werewolves moved as one, each a blur of raw power and ferocity. The first guard to make a move never stood a chance. His scream was cut short as Cade's massive paw swiped him aside like a rag doll. The remaining guards hesitated, unsure, but fear was no match to the pack's resolve. They advanced, their eyes glowing with an unspoken promise of destruction. Zareth's eyes flashed with panic. Activate the defenses, he shouted, his voice trembling for the first time. Send in the elite enforcers. The room seemed to hum with the sudden activation of the satellite's internal defense systems. Mechanical gates slammed down, cutting off escape routes, and from hidden chambers, heavily armed enforcers emerged, their weapons trained on the werewolves. These were no ordinary soldiers. Cybernetically enhanced and heavily armored, they moved with precision, designed to kill anything in their path. But the werewolves were not ordinary creatures, either. They were survivors, warriors forged in the crucible of Earth's harshest trials. As the enforcers advanced, their weapons fired in unison, but the werewolves were faster, leaping and darting with inhuman agility. Jacob heard the sharp, familiar crack of bone as the first enforcer met their end. His body crushed beneath the force of a werewolf's jaws. Blood splattered across the walls as the battle intensified. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning flesh, the sharp, metallic tang of blood mixing with the tension in the air. Jacob's heart raced as his pack tore through their enemies with precision and brutality. Each strike was calculated, a move toward the ultimate goal, the annihilation of the Council. Zareth snarled, his fingers flying over the control panel, his desperation now clear. You think you can win this? You're outmatched. Jacob's eyes locked onto Zareth's, his every word a promise. You've underestimated us from the beginning, and now you'll learn what happens when you do. With a swift motion, Jacob leapt forward, his claws slashing through the air, aimed directly for the heart of the Council's leader. But before he could reach Zareth, the chamber systems pulsed, and a massive force field enveloped the platform, blocking his path. No one reaches me, Zareth declared, his voice cold and filled with malice. You're nothing but beasts. Jacob paused, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had not expected this. Zareth had a contingency plan, something to hold him back just long enough for his escape. But Jacob wasn't a fool. He had no intention of letting this be the end. With a low growl, Jacob turned to Cade. Break it down. Cade nodded without hesitation, his massive form already charging at the force field. He rammed his body against it, the shockwave reverberating through the chamber, but it held firm. The Council's technology was formidable, but Cade was more than just brute strength. He was a heart of their pack, the one who had led them to this moment. His determination was unyielding. Jacob's claws dug into the control panel, tearing through the delicate wiring as he manipulated the systems. Sparks flew as he hacked into the satellite's defenses, overriding Zareth's control. For a brief moment, the field flickered, weakening just enough for Cade to land a devastating blow. The force field collapsed with a deafening crack, leaving Zareth exposed. Now was the time. Without hesitation, Jacob surged forward, his pack at his back. They closed the distance in mere seconds, and this time there would be no escape for the Galactic Council. Zareth's eyes widened as the werewolves descended upon him. But the terror was fleeting. His reign was over. Jacob's claws sank into Zareth's chest with a sickening crunch. The leader's final scream echoed to the chamber, drowned out by the triumphant roar of the pack. Earth had sent its message. The galaxy would remember this day, not as a victory for the Council, but as a day humanity proved that no one, not even the most powerful empire, could break them. As Zareth's lifeless body crumpled to the floor, Jacob stood over him, chest heaving with exertion. The battle was won, but as he looked around at the destruction, the cost of their victory settled heavily in his heart. They had taken everything back, but at what cost? Earth is not your playground, Jacob muttered, his voice rough. We will never bow. The pack gathered around him, their victorious howls filling the air. The Galactic Council had fallen, but the war for Earth's future had just begun.